As parents and people who work with kids, we want the kids in our lives to feel good. And recent research shows that the right amount of feel good hormones at the right time in the right place in the brain can help people work through incredibly debilitating mental health challenges. But the question is, with all of this research, what do we do when there are so many things in our life that stimulate our brain to produce feel good enzymes all the time? Is there a responsibility that parents have to manage how often our kids feel good? We're going to look at some new science, and we're going to talk about that next on the Celebrate Kids podcast.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, the brain continuously changes during adulthood and really throughout adolescence. The onset of neuropsychiatric disorders, things like schizophrenia, often begin during young adulthood. Dysfunction of the dopamine system, necessary for cognitive processing and decision-making, kind of begins at that same point in development. And now researchers are targeting what they're calling underperforming neurons in the dopamine system that connect to the frontal cortex in mice. This circuitry is essential in higher cognitive processing and decision-making. They found that stimulating the cells that provide dopamine to the frontal cortex strengthened the circuit and rescued structural deficiencies in the brain that cause long-term symptoms. One of the researchers noted that, quote, these findings suggest that increasing the activity of adolescent dopaminergic, I don't even know if I'm saying that word right, circuitry can rescue existing deficits in the circuit, and that this effect can be long-lasting as these changes persist into adulthood. If we can target the right windows in development and understand the signals at play, we can develop treatments that change the course of these brain disorders, end quote. So, Dr. Kathy, this is incredible. It's not only incredible because it's all over my head. It's also incredible because of the link that dopamine has to things inside of technology. Many times we're essentially giving kids stimuli to flood their system with dopamine. Not that we're giving them those stimuli to bring about dopamine, but dopamine's the natural byproduct of some of the stimuli that they get from social media. Researchers like Abigail Schreier and others have kind of talked about the onset of gender crises with mental health, knowing that we're kind of flooding teens with this love for dopamine and these different feel-good enzymes that are in our body naturally, and we're possibly kind of wearing out their receptor cells by giving them so much technology, and that this could be kind of leading to mental health challenges. It's all really interesting to me and something that I'm continuously reading up on. But I'd like to hear a little bit from you. What are your thoughts on this and these studies that they're doing and how they're being used to kind of treat maybe something that's being caused by our love and addiction to social media?
It's fascinating to me. And I would love to meet people who choose to research with mice. Like, I don't understand that at all. Oh my gosh. Cracks me up, right? I'm just trying to watch these little mice being injected with dopamine and then watching the reactions. Wow. So yeah, I tell people all the time that they're not addicted to the device per se. They're not addicted even to the game. They're addicted to the dopamine drop. You can have your phone on silent, but when you recognize that a text has come in, you're distracted and you have now you have a harder time concentrating because the dopamine has affected the prefrontal cortex and the thinking part of the brain. And so, it's dangerous. I mean, this is fascinating. You're right that we believe that gaming and social media in particular are giving kids way too much dopamine. And yet the researchers found out that a little bit of dopamine in the right place can actually prevent maybe or reverse the deficit and maybe stop some of these really dangerous mental health issues. So I'm confused, and I think we need a lot more research.
Yeah, I agree. There is so much to this and so much that's being developed in this to understand really the levels of dopamine and how it does impact on different strata of people's developments is really kind of incredible and interesting and just shouts to the reality of God's beauty and order in creating humans. But there's also something that I'm kind of concerned about here because there's a rise in mental health incidents in teens. We've talked about that a lot. What do you think that this kind of treatment might do for those different things that we see? Because they're really working to treat neuropsychiatric disorders, things like schizophrenia or multiple people personalities or different things like that. And I'm super interested to understand a little bit of what we think this might do for teens and kind of their natural development. What do you think that this might do for mental health?
Well, I wonder, again, we got to learn more. And I love that you're on the lookout for what's going on. I certainly, if I were parenting a child who had been diagnosed already as schizophrenic or multiple personality disorder or other, very serious mental health trauma issues, I would latch on to any hope I could find. And so if there's a way for the right level of dopamine in the right way to stimulate the right things to bring something back to normal, I mean, that's fabulous. I'm concerned about kids who are so used to the dopamine effect that boredom terrifies them and they'll do anything to stay away from being bored, that they cannot handle, reading a book with pages that turn or doing, math problems with a pencil, just go on. And the world is full of things that go slowly. And that's a huge concern I have. And I think that increases the mental health crisis. I don't know if that makes sense. Kids who are dissatisfied, kids who are discontent, kids who are bored constantly. That's why they have to have their device and why it's so hard for them when we say take it away or put it away. But I am concerned that they're not going to be able to live in the real world because the real world does not work like a screen.
Right. And Dr. Kathy, I want to close out with this kind of last question because I think that it's helpful for parents to kind of know maybe what we're facing a little bit. When we look around at our kids and things of that nature, we can see them struggling. But how do we know when our kids might be struggling with something that's kind of mental health related? And how do we know maybe when those things are environmental? Maybe they have kind of a challenged friend or a challenge in their classroom. And how do we know when maybe they're actually kind of a biological issue that might need some treatment? Is there certain things that we should be attentive to as we're watching our kids develop and grow?
Yeah, great question. I like to say to parents that, sudden changes in your kid's behavior would indicate something's going on. And it might be with them, or as you said, it might be with a friend of theirs, and they're not handling the stress well that, is caused by the fact that their best friend's parents are talking divorce or whatever might be going on there. So I would look for sudden changes in their choices, decisions, attitudes, and actions. I like to say that we typically, I don't think we should ask kids, hey, are you stressed? Are you depressed? Because I'm not sure they know what that feels like. And even if they recognize stress, I'm not sure they'd want to admit it to you because they've been told it's a bad thing. And they wonder what might happen if they would admit to a mom or a teacher or a dad, yeah, Dad, I'm stressed. So what I like to say is we observe behavior and we say to our kids, hey, I noticed that you were so critical with your brother today. And typically, you're kinder. So what's up with that? We say to our daughter, normally you enjoy hanging out and you like to go for my after dinner walk with me and you haven't wanted to do that for a couple of nights. So I'm thinking something's going on. So let's indicate to our kids that we're aware, that we're present, that we have seen something that's changed, and we invite them to have a conversation. And then when we have those conversations, we listen longer and we are really careful to judge. We listen longer, feel their pain before you try to solve a problem. Those are some of the things that I think will help us recognize what level of pain are our kids in and what is it that we could do about it.
I think the message inside of this topic is one that we've talked about many times here, that often the responsibility of parents and those that work with kids is really about spending time, listening longer, and monitoring and managing how kids change as they develop. And in those times, I think we can find ourselves questioning or wondering, are we doing it right? But there's some words out of Colossians that I think that Paul was speaking to the Colossian church as they watched many things change around them that are really helpful in this moment. And they come out of Colossians chapter 3, beginning at verse 2. And this is what Paul writes. Set your mind on things above, not on the things that are on the earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these things, the wrath of God is coming. In these you too once walked, when you were living in them. But now you must put them all away: anger and wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off your old self with its practices, and have put on your new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creator. What Paul is encouraging the Colossian church to do is to remember the new self that they have been given in the beauty and the finished work of the cross and the grave. And oftentimes our role working with kids is to call them to that. But not only to call them to that, to notice when they haven't been in that place and to walk with them through maybe hard times, challenging times, or as this research talked about, maybe implementing feel-good times into their life to stimulate a renewing of their mind. In all of the research and everything that we've talked about today, I think that's what the science is showing. That God calls us to renew our mind. And the best feel-good enzymes that we can muster up or generate or create are the ones that come when we find our true identity in Jesus Christ. And that's a bright light for this dark time. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast, our daily segment, Facing the Dark. And on behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook and the rest of us here on the team, I want to say thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.